when you get into this space, there's what you know and then what you have to kind of assess, right? Because they're obviously not gonna come right out and say, "We're producing super soldiers," right? And so some of this is analysis. So, I try to be careful in the book of where I say, "This is what I know, and this is what we can assess." So my assessment is that population improvement is code for super soldiers. There's most likely also a perfectly reasonable civilian commercial use for this. People wanna cure diseases. That's that's something that people wanna do. But, there's a need for creating super soldiers. And I would look at, when you talk about super soldiers, like, really, what does this mean, right? So, one is, there is tons of work on, look, healthcare for veterans and people in the military, right? We do that too. The DARPA does that, like, there's a history of this. Going back to World War I, in fact, like, plastic surgery was invented for the victims of World War I. This goes all the way back to them. Um, and no doubt China is trying to do that for their own soldiers, just like most, world militaries do the same. Then there is actual creation of super soldiers, so improving the performance of military, soldiers, right? And that can be done, in several ways. There's a whole world of kind of human machine augmentation, right? Like using there's brain interface devices that can be used, exterior types of technologies or implants, like that's another area. So Neuralink is the US company, and I didn't write about it in my book, but I suspect China has a whole slew of attempts at those kinds of things. Then there is, you know, human improvement via non-mechanical, non-electronic things like drugs, right? And like steroids, the use of amphetamines, like these things go back decades. And again, now we get into the analysis part. I suspect also the creation of drugs to enhance people temporarily um, through biotechnology. Third would be probably what you're more thinking of, and most people think of is like actually genetically engineering people to be better at something. And there was reporting, kind of pretty wide reporting of China tests on human, cells of some sort where they're implanting this tardigus, like it's like a little sort of it's not microscopic actually, it's like you can see them, but they're very, very small, like less than a millimeter, kind of animals that are very hardy, like they, can withstand cold and heat and, like, radiation, and there was reporting of this, and that was years ago, right, that it was reported. There's also the reporting that, a Chinese scientist genetically engineered a baby, which was born and is still apparently healthy, like, we don't know. That person was supposedly put in prison, but no one actually knows where that person is right now, right? It's a authoritarian country. Who knows what they're doing? Maybe they're working in a military facility. We wouldn't know. So there's that kind of thing, and I think that, again, connecting the dots is is this genetic material? Because, remember when you're genetically engineering a person, or using, either as a fetus, like if you're changing it in a child, or later in life, you need the material you wanna change, and by collecting material from people around the world through BGA Genomics and other platforms, right? It's also appears, again, I would use appears, but in my view, likely they've hacked, you know, genetic information from other people taking tests, because these companies have been hacked, and that's been reported. I think 23andMe was hacked, and they have genetic material from all sorts of Americans and people from around the world. So they can be collecting it through the companies, they can be collecting it by other means, and this would give you the material that you would need to know what to change in like a super soldier, right? And how to make them. There's another issue here, which is like creation of bioweapons. And that's probably the scariest. There is a history of this. So the Post-Apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa found that the apartheid government had been experimenting with biotechnologies that just targeted Black people in South Africa. So ethnically targeted um, biotechnologies. Now, they didn't have the ability, this was in the 80s, to do genetic engineering, but that's like the really scary fear is that you might ethnically target. So one could imagine like a disease, for example, that did not affect Han Chinese genomes, but affected everyone else. Like now again, I'm just making that up. I don't know, but like that is the fear of where these things can go. And by the way, not just the Chinese, terrorists could try to do this, right? Like there like any number of countries, this is like a real fear. And I'll say one more thing and then we can go wherever you want. I think when a lot of people think of super soldiers, they think of like being really strong or something, really fast. And I do think that that's something, that's possible, but actually, probably what's more likely is, they might be just really hardy, like have more cold tolerance and things like this, able to heal faster, things like that, which would be good for people in general. So this may be a blurry line between like what's for a super soldier and what's like we're just making life better for people. Um, Also maybe making people smarter. And that's going to be, when you look, and there was a recent article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal about companies in Silicon Valley who want to like genetically engineer children, to be like smarter or taller, or have blue eyes or whatever. Um, no doubt China is thinking the same way for its own people. And like there are companies who want to do that. Now, tons of military crossover. And I think a key term in this space is dual use. These are technologies that have a military use and they have a government use. And so it's kind of both. And it's a blurry line between, something that might have legitimate medical use to like make people's lives better and what could be used to, support a military industrial. Also that they might be very smart, right? And that they might create, genetically engineered, geniuses that could be enlisted in the PLA to support intelligence or to support decision making in some port. So that is a literal danger, and the Biotechnology Commission, alludes to that as well. That like there's a competitive aspect that's sort of scary, and that we may in the West be at a disadvantage of because of our legal and ethical norms around human experimentation. But also for the soldiers themselves, it's dangerous, right? I mean, they're being experimented on. And like maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's something that, yes, makes you perform at a higher level while you're a soldier, and then you get cancer when you're 38. Right? And there's always any medicine like this that's not publicly peer reviewed and that doesn't, go through this process of safety review, which is likely what's happening. I mean, if something's being done in secret, it's by definition not being peer reviewed, it's not being, tested safely. Like there are very serious downsides and these soldiers could be endangered.